This is why crab cakes are great, because I don't have to deal with any of that. They come to me just like a burger. I don't see the cow dying. You want me to watch the lobster die? It's weird, man.
By the way, funny story. Not being from the ocean, little town in Manchester, England.
Is Liverpool the one that's on the water? Is Manchester inland?
Manchester's inland. Liverpool is,
Oh, okay.
close to the bay, but more of an inlet. I didn't know that lobsters change color. So when I went when I went to the fish market one day with Isabel, we're buying lobster, and I was like, oh, any reason why you would buy the gray ones and not the pink ones? And typical Isabel, she sort of did the laugh off, right? And I'm like, no, I'm serious. Like, are they less expensive? Are they more expensive? Are they flavor different? And she's like, are you serious? Like, you seriously don't know that these things change color when you cook them? How would I know that?
Amazing. Yeah, I suppose the only reason I know that is because we used to make lobster when I was a kid.
Yeah, it's not like I sit around watching cooking shows.
Well, you should sit around and watch cooking shows. They are delightful and great. I wonder how much I know that from us actually cooking lobster versus we were a Julia Child family and watched Julia Child and Jacques Pepin on PBS. And so, like,
It all makes sense now. Why, like, Melody being such an amazing cook, and
yeah, you've eaten Melody's food. You understand what family this is.
I'm happy with a piece of toast and a glass of milk.
Oh, yeah. That's part of our horrifying AI discussion and your soylent future of just the slurry of protein that you'll down in order to maintain your biological metastasis.
Yeah, every single minute has value now. Sitting around eating.
You've eaten Melody's food. You understand the value in that delicious consumption.
And that's true, but if you can make that food on the run, then I would still eat it, right? The food can't slow me down.
You need to take a moment to enjoy the little things.
I do, just not the.
The meaning of life is to stop and smell the flowers, as we learned at the end of the movie Dogma. In your robot future, the robots will do that work for you.
And you see, that's why we got to get them in.
Uh-huh.
Like, think about how efficient it is.
To be fair, in that robot future, it won't actually be cows. It'll be lab-grown fillets, which actually might be better for the environment. Although there's a version of that future where it's actually secretly like ground up crickets, and we just don't notice the difference, which I'm all for.
Yeah, you're all for, right? As long as you don't know.
I don't mind if you put an Impossible Burger, as long as it tastes good. I don't care what weird stuff goes into it. I'm not a purist about the beef. The problem is they haven't been able to make the ground up crickets taste like beef. So you all need to do some work on the genetically modified crickets that taste like cow. I don't know.
I really like you to go away with Melody and do the experiment now. Can Melody take a quarter pound of crickets and drum up something tasty that you will eat? And we should get that recorded for the show.
There you go.
Food of the future.
Welcome to Acceptance Criteria, where we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of how software gets made and how we can all do a better job together. My name is Kevin Thomas Euland, and across the chat from me is Andrew Greener. Say hi, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew. We're also here to get deeper on the human elements. I could go on for an eternity about people and how they think about the process of building complex systems. And I can't think of two better people than Kevin and I to get into that.
I can, but it's our show, damn it. On this week's show, we'll be talking about the lessons we can learn from past internet failures. Companies like StumbleUpon, Digg, and Delicious were all, at their peaks, the leaders of brand new ways of using the internet, and yet they all ended up failing for various reasons.
Is it delicious or is it D.lisha period?
It's like Kesha. Is Kesha pronounced key $ha?
Delicious. And as I was reading earlier about why it was delicious and how it came back from the unusual domain name. But yeah, I love this topic. Been on my mind for about 15 years. Maybe I'm glad I didn't go down this route because of what happened to all these guys. But I also think they might have missed something, which we'll get into. So I'm looking forward to hearing your research. I've seen your research notes, so it's going to be a lot of Kevin tonight. Just a little Andrew piping up.
Yeah, I was going to say, interrupt me as you have questions about what's going on as we talk about.
Yeah, I definitely will. To the listeners, just so you know, I've had a product idea for many, many years. For those that know me on the technical side, some of them I've shared that idea and we've talked about it. And a lot of what I've been thinking about is coming to pass now. And I think maybe some of these companies were ahead of their time or missed a trick. And so it'll be interesting to see if that's accurate. Yeah, we'll get into it.
But before we get to all of that, let's take a short break and we'll be right back. All right, welcome back. This is a segment we like to call market analysis, where we'll look at a product or app or technology and talk through our impressions, how we think some of the product and engineering decisions were made to arrive at how the thing works, and share our thoughts on how good or bad we think it is. In this case, it's going to be the failure of early internet success stories like StumbleUpon and Digg. So, it's all bad at this point, but there were some good things, and we'll talk about the ways that it seems that they got there. So, our first company is StumbleUpon. It was originally a browser toolbar for Firefox with three simple buttons: stumble, thumbs up, and thumbs down. It would show you random sites on the internet, and as your friends started to thumbs up and thumbs down those sites, as you started to thumbs up and thumbs down them, it would try and stumble you in the right direction of other similar sites. It was some basic early machine learning type algorithms that were trying to understand what it should show you, but it was truly meant to be random. It was this idea that the internet was this new, interesting place that you would come to, and I don't know how to describe it. You, like, in 2001, 2002, you were doing this thing because the internet wasn't your life yet. You didn't have social media, you didn't have it on your phone, you probably used it a little bit at work maybe, or, depending on your job, significantly at work, but still, it was not integrated into our lives the way it is now. And so there was this the information superhighway, the web. It was this thing that people still, it feels weird to talk about the early 2000s like this because I lived it, but it is true that you just interacted with the amount of content, the amount of information that was out on the web at that point differently. And so this was a thing trying to find the little interesting nuggets of newness. It was random, and that was delightful to people. And this is before there was a like button or a news feed or any of the things we take for granted today in social media, and the ways that people found this new information was just entirely different. There's two interesting articles that we'll link in the show notes, one from How to Geek and the other from Polygon, talking about how in the early 2000s our exposure to the internet was fundamentally different. And I think it's really interesting to sort of poke back at the search engines at the time, and even today still are very much driven off of you have a goal in mind. And I used to go to a bunch of like different websites where I would over my lunch break to go and read about different things because I was a full-on nerd and wanted to understand what was going on in different types of development, and that was a specific topic that I was looking for. But then there were places like Fark, and I'm trying to think of what the other ones were just like random stuff was put in front of you, and that was very much how the internet seemed to work at that time. I don't know, what was your early 2000s internet like?
That was probably me too. There was this need to always be consuming new information, right? And
Right.
I was out there, and it's weird. Like, I would have 150 sites that I would be visiting. And, if you fast forward to today and you watch me, maybe with age, I'm like, all right, I'm at capacity. I need to just focus on the things I know about right now. But if you were to look at my web searches today, I'm down to like 15 to 20 sites. Or that's why these companies have gone through hard times, is that all of us have trimmed back to this 15 or 20 sites because those 15 or 20 sites have replaced what these guys originally did. But yeah, there was, I think, maybe a bit of both, but I was definitely craving information back then. And was there any information on the type of machine learning that these guys were doing in the beginning?
Not that I could find. It was only mostly talking about the fact that you did have the ability to sort of know who your friends and family were, and so you were linked somehow to those other users, and therefore when you did thumbs up or thumbs down, or your friends did thumbs up or thumbs down, they assumed that there was some direct relationship from your action, but also some indirect relation from friends taking actions. And if you're friends, you have a better chance of liking the same things. And so it seemed pretty basic from what I could find.
Yeah, and I love these concepts. Fundamentally, the machine learning for me is key for all of these, right? Because at some point, I don't want to leave a breadcrumb trail, right? I want the breadcrumb trail to be done under the covers so I don't have to take the extra effort for people to understand what I like and when I like it. So that'll be interesting to see if we get into that.
And I think we'll get, as we talk about what this company started to do, I think one of the interesting things is if you think about how was that system able to understand the context of the site that someone was thumbs upping. So you just thumbs up the astronomy blog because you want to look at, Hubble Space Telescope photos. Was there enough information back then? How did it, like, I'm super curious how did it actually understand that you were interested in space as a result of the article or page that you had just thumbs up? And that is still an issue today that we have. And there's a reason why it sounds like there are some features we'll talk about. Maybe I'll just keep going through the timeline here, but there were some features that they added to add user generated information to provide that context, but we still struggle with that today. So in 2007, it was acquired by eBay, and that apparently halted any new feature development as eBay corporates sort of stepped in and said, we need to be a part of all product decisions. And so users noticed that suddenly nothing was going on with this app capability anymore. And so by 2008, it had lost 1.2 million monthly users, which in a year in the early 2000s, that's a devastating drop off in user usage based on nothing new is happening. I'm still using the same site. They were sold back to the original founders from eBay in 2009, and that did seem to invigorate the company, and they had a bunch of growth pickup. They added a bunch of features that were starting to sort of go beyond the original just helping you find new content, and they acquired some apps. They tried to get into some mobile video, I think, and by 2011, as part of rolling out a massive redesign, they ended up deleting a bunch of user-generated posts, and the redesign itself was apparently a complete disaster. They tried to mimic Pinterest because Pinterest had sort of taken over as this concept of ways that you can discover content from other people, and apparently that rollout was so bad that it immediately, within a couple of months, killed 25% of their traffic, and it was pretty fatal. That it sort of limped along for a couple more years. It ended up in 2018 being changed over to some other mix.com, I think, but by that point it had completely changed, and it was no longer the same StumbleUpon, no longer the random trying to truly show you new pieces of the internet. I think it's really interesting, as we're going to talk through a bunch of these different things, these redesigns and the inability to sort of understand where your users are going can quickly kill you.
Do you remember the distrust we have today of the big companies, right? Like, hey, Facebook's buying this. Oh, no,
Mhm.
I'm not going to use it anymore. Did we have that for eBay? Did we have a distrust of eBay? I don't think so,
That's
right?
interesting.
I've got to assume there were people like, there's always been people like that. I bet if we went back 1,000 years.
Yeah, I don't think we noticed, right? Because eBay bought Skype for a while, and I don't think anyone blames eBay for Skype. I think people blame Microsoft for Skype, who took it over eventually. But yeah, I don't know that it sounds like eBay should get a ton of flack from people for what they did to a bunch of companies that they acquired.
I think social impacted these companies, right? Facebook, Twitter. I think there was a big social media push, which probably hurt these companies as well. I'm curious, when I thought of these companies, when I thought of my own idea, it was always a social play. And I wonder if these guys missed that social play a little bit, because I don't think Facebook and the others have actually filled that need that I want. So we can get to that.
All right, I think that's it for StumbleUpon. Basically, the death knell was they did a redesign that tried to be too much like Pinterest, and that killed 25% of their traffic, and it was a slow march to death at that point. They went on for a number of years, but at that point, hindsight is 2020, but that seems to be sort of the death of StumbleUpon, even though it didn't officially die for another 7 years. All right, so the next company we're going to look at is Digg. So Digg was a news aggregator that let users submit stories and content that they could rate. Basically, Reddit before Reddit. Started in 2004, it had astronomical growth for the time, having 1 million users by 2007. But 2007 was sort of a rocky year for them as they faced challenges over what it meant to be a news aggregator. There was a small controversy when the leaked decryption key for HD DVDs, a competitor to Blu-ray. People don't remember that period. The decryption key was posted to Digg, and the site initially removed the post because that's illegal. But then they ended up caving to user pressure and reinstating it, and sort of causing a little mini storm with their users, saying you're not the arbiter of what goes onto your own thing. You are a free whatever for us to do whatever we want with you. And it was the first of several missteps that they had between their power users. I think one of the fascinating parts of this company's history is at that time in 2007, the founders ended up having to host weekly town hall meetings to run all their feature ideas by those power users. The power that those people had over this thing, and I think that's where we talk about the size of these, the outsize, the perception of Digg as this massive thing. And I'm not saying 1 million people is, getting to 1 million is a huge number. I'm not saying that that's small, but in comparison to where we are today with some of these companies, the idea that Zuckerberg would host a weekly town hall to decide what the future of Meta should be because his power users are telling him, that is phenomenal.
It seems like the more you research about Digg, I don't want to accuse the community of destroying it. There's elements of the community, but it does seem like the community contributed to the demise of Digg, right? Along with really bad versions, really bad design decisions. But I seem to remember, I probably have flaw in the design, right? But there were communities that were exploiting for pad statting, I guess. Stat padding the other way, not pad statting. Stat padding, multiple account, voting their own posts and things like that. I do remember the community was a bit tedious at times.
Well, and I think we'll talk about that in sort of the overall conclusions, but it's the balancing act we've talked about a couple of times on this show of your power users are important, and you should figure out ways to make sure that the people driving the highest impact usage of your system are listened to, but also the counterpoint to that is exactly this Digg scenario. And how do you account for the fact that in these situations, people start using your apps and your solutions in ways you didn't intend, and now all of a sudden your intention for Digg was not to be this, your intention was to be something else, but the users have found a way to use it this way, and now if they're the ones giving giving you all of they're generating all the content, but they're generating all of the information that most of your other users are seeing. And that's where your ad revenue is coming from. And that's the only way you make money. Now you're caught in this trap of, I can't lose the people who are using this thing the way I don't want them to use it.
So I hate to pick on Reddit. Did Reddit appease those users by making them mods?
I mean,
Is that the premise? The distraction?
no,
Be a
it's
mod?
interesting. If you go and look at the history of Reddit, there's a reason 4chan was created, and then, I mean, 8chan was created out of 4chan, because even 4chan had to draw a line somewhere, which is surprising. But Reddit actually, as much of a cesspool as Reddit still probably is in some places, and really, really was in some of those earlier days, they actually did end up having to draw the line and shut some of that stuff down. But yeah, I mean, that's why Reddit has the reputation it has, because finding that line is incredibly tricky. This is a bigger free speech and Twitter and Facebook, and Zuckerberg is I can't say he's directly responsible for genocide in East Asia, but Facebook has a role to play in some really messed up things around the world. And his answer has been, yeah, but the 4 moderators I hired to work out of Thailand can't do that job. Like, yeah, bud, yeah, you're on the hook. Your system is enabling a bunch of this stuff. Sorry, that wasn't your intention in the dorm room, but you got to cope with what your users are actually using your system for. And if you don't have a business model that is stable enough to survive telling users you don't get to use my software the way you've decided to use it, was it a good business model? Well, speaking of business model, so Digg in 2007 inked a deal that sort of surprised everybody. They didn't go with Google, they went with Microsoft to do their ads. Though by 2009, they ended up switching to a direct sales strategy and offered that ad space to marketers directly, which I think we'll get into as one of the fundamental things that I think a lot of these companies didn't understand was you do need to make money, right? So ad revenue is one way of doing that, but did you think about how ads would incorporate into this experience? In 2010, they rolled out a version 4 and immediately users hated it. Usability seems to have been a primary reason why people didn't like version 4, to the point that users started posting links to Reddit, a major competitor, and basically turned for a while Digg into a Reddit aggregator. So version 4 also introduced the ability for publishers to submit content via APIs, enabling those advertisers to basically flood the site with links to their own content that they wanted promoted, while at the same time, version 4 also removed the downvote feature that had previously allowed the community to bury spammers. And so basically a mass exodus of users. By 2011, Reddit had overtaken Digg in popularity and traffic. So once again, we have the intersection of commerce and usability, and they had a terrible redesign, and there was no reason for you to stick around Digg if you didn't like it. Reddit was in the right place at the right time.
I always wonder, I always look at that opportunity, the stickiness of your user base and the opportunity for them to jump ship. Because it's not easy. We look at X and was it Threads? People, there was all that motivation. It's almost like you have to get that momentum. You have to get over a hurdle and the momentum to do the full shift to really kill your competitor. And
Right?
Threads hasn't really done that, right? But like between Digg and Reddit, there obviously was. And actually, Reddit, when I find the right communities, the experience is good.
It's hard to look at this. What do we call this? This is Web 2.0 era. This is like the
Yes.
mid-internet, right?
Yeah.
This is more and more people are using it more and more frequently, but this is still, the fact that they were astronomical growth, and the guy who founded Digg, Kevin Rose, I think was his name, was hailed as this massive rock star, and it was a rock star for having 1 million users in 2007, and it took them 3 years to do that. That's great, but that's also by today's standards not at all. I don't know. The reason you could migrate everybody from Digg to Reddit is because it was 200,000 people, which maybe I have a difficult time. Human beings in general have a difficult time dealing with large numbers like this, but especially in this situation, we're not talking about 1 billion people on Facebook and 200 million. I don't know that Twitter is active users. My active part of Twitter is not 200 million people, but the inertia in a lot of these things is bigger now than it was back then. All right, so our third company is Delicious, or d.licio.us, however you want to pronounce that. It was a place for people to curate their bookmarks, because things like Chrome's ability to sync your bookmarks across devices in the cloud didn't exist. And so if you found things that you wanted to read at lunch while you were on your home computer, you didn't have a way to make sure that that was available on your work laptop or whatever. You needed a service like Delicious to help you share that information. It was one of the first apps to use the concept of tagging, so they actually sort of invented the idea of, I don't know if they invented the idea, but they were one of the first to broadly implement the idea of you could just have freeform text. I'm going to tag this bookmark as whatever, and you didn't have to fit into a hierarchy. You didn't have to fit into pre-existing categories categories that the system had defined. You could define your own taxonomy for how you wanted to do all of that. That sounds much more nerdy than most people using Delicious probably thought of it as, but that is what you were doing, is you were creating your own way of organizing things through open text tags, which at the time was pretty revolutionary. Like, Yahoo is still a major search engine at this point, and Yahoo is a category-based engine that is defined by the company, and this is a new way for the internet to interact with the data that it's putting out into these systems. It also allowed you to create curated lists of bookmarks that you could share with others. So if you did have, here are the 5 tech sites I get a bunch of, value from, and I want to share it with all of the nerds at work, there was a handy way of sharing what you were collecting. They were acquired by Yahoo. Speaking of, that must have been a subconscious join in my brain. So they were acquired by Yahoo, and actually, apparently, as part of the integration with the Yahoo platform, they were forced to rewrite the entire app in PHP, and that basically killed all momentum, and no new functionality rolled out for a little bit. During all of that process, there was apparently a slide from an internal Yahoo meeting that leaked out onto the internet, and it was announced on that slide that Delicious would be sunsetted. It turned out it actually meant they were just going to sell it off, but they used the word sunsetted, which most people assume means they're going to kill it. And so all of a sudden, again, right place, right time, Pinboard was a place where you could do very similar things. And so a mass exodus of users happened. It was then acquired by Avos. I have no idea how you pronounce this. Avos, which was basically the startup incubator from the two guys who created YouTube. They took it on, and the process of acquiring Delicious from Yahoo involved a complete rewrite. So it took them a while to do this. They still called it version 3 for some reason, even though they didn't have access to any of the original source code that Yahoo had. They rolled out version 3 with a terrible design. Everything was broken. It was full of bugs. So not only did the users hate the new design, a bunch of the functionality didn't work, and they hadn't finished migrating all of the data from Yahoo. And so when everyone logged into this new version 3, which they didn't have a choice of logging into, it looked like a bunch of their data was missing and that the upgrade had totally failed them. So they also just bungled this rollout, had it be fully full of bugs, and didn't tell anybody, hey, all of your bookmarks will be here within 3 weeks. They just showed up one morning and suddenly half their bookmarks were gone. And so, again, a massive exodus of users, as it just, didn't make sense how they did this. There's a bunch of choices that Avos makes in this process. They deprecate that tag functionality, that thing that allows the users to define what they want to do, for some new thing called stacks, which seemed like basically just tags with a different name and a harder UI. And as part of this migration process, migrated a second time from PHP to a React app, a single page app, and that further delayed and, nothing new happened on Delicious for a while they were doing all of these technical underpinning changes that didn't benefit any of the users.
I don't know the exact timing of each of these, sort of breakdown, the systematic breakdown of each of these, but
it's all early to 2010s.
It's almost like there's nobody sort of looking across and retrospective of the others, right? And understanding like
Right.
we're going down the same route. And you don't even need to necessarily have a back door into another company to realize like, hey, these are the same mistakes. You and I have seen it. It's the same patterns in big companies, right? We've both been acquired, and we've seen that when the acquiring company is talking, and we're like, is that really where you want to go with this? Like,
Right.
that's why we built this and why we were successful. And the reason you bought us was because we were taking your business, right? So do you really want to turn it into what you had?
Well, what's fascinating is Delicious and StumbleUpon both have the acquisition trap. So they both get acquired, and the acquiring company fully ruins it. Digg doesn't. Digg resists getting acquired several times and goes and raises money and still falls into the same trap. So it's interesting that it's this Venn diagram of what happens when you get acquired and you let the parent company doesn't know what to do with this thing, and the acquisition purpose was who knows what, trying to acquire the users, thinking that you were going to somehow take all of the Delicious users and fit them into the Yahoo ecosystem. If eBay, I don't know what eBay was thinking in the early 2000s, but it's really interesting that I don't know how to categorize all of these, because setting acquisition aside, also all three of them made terrible redesigns where they clearly were not talking to the users and had someone making product decisions based on who knows what. But had you run any of these ideas by a healthy mix of your users, you would have avoided a lot of this?
So two things. One, Dig, it's in the name, right? they dug they dug their own grave, right? So
Sure.
it was inevitable. Two, let me ask you a question as a product guy then. Can that be a struggle to understand what you're mutating into? Because there's
Yeah.
bad design because you make bad decisions, but you're also at a period of change with social networks, right? So are they struggling to understand? Are they struggling as trendsetters? Are they failing as innovators, or are they? Is it really just somebody who doesn't know how to design something?
I'd be super curious. There was an interesting thread on Y Combinator from some of the actual original engineers of, I believe it was, let's see, it was Delicious. It was Delicious engineers talking about the Yahoo acquisition and the things that they were forced to do. And it does seem, it kind of goes back to that conversation we had about the Apple Podcast app and how you balance the needs of power users versus basic users. It's these companies all fall into this. Again, I'm such a nerd. It's a Venn diagram, right? Of like overlapping problems, right? And so you have growth, and that growth is powered by two different types of users. The power user, who's providing most of the generated information that your other users are consuming. The casual user, who gets plenty of benefit from it, but is a consumer of what the power users are outputting in your app. You then have a shifting landscape as competitors and social media are, and the adoption of the internet and people's behaviors are changing. And so consumer behavior is changing underneath you. And your original idea might not actually make much sense by 2012 and the way people are now using the internet. And so how do you adapt and change to all of that? And you then also have on top of that, I think Silicon Valley and a lot of people, not outside of Silicon Valley, but I think especially at this period, especially as you see Steve Jobs rolling out the iPhone, every product manager, and I shouldn't say every product manager, so many product managers bought into the Henry Ford-ism of if I'd asked my users what they wanted, I'd have built them a faster horse. And what I'm doing for them is the smart, new, amazing thing. I'm the guy who created Digg. I know what the future of the internet is. My idea is great. And so I'm going to roll out the automobile. I'm going to roll out the iPhone. I think this is the time period where that kind of Silicon Valley thinking is crystallizing around. You are going to break the mold, and therefore listening to user feedback is unimportant. And listen, there are plenty of cases where a truly new idea is absolutely going to do a new thing. Delicious rolled out the concept of tagging to people in a way that hadn't been widely adopted. I'm not going to claim that they were the first to ever do that, but that was one of the first places where people started to understand the power of the concept of tagging. That's great. You did something brand new, but you also added a million users who now were used to a formula and were used to a way of doing things. And if you were trying to create the next automobile, you didn't do it in such a way that you brought your users with you. And so I think an interesting part of this is, would these folks have been successful had they actually had product and UX folks who wanted to go and actually understand the current users, understand the power users, and then, yeah, it might be hard to figure out, and maybe doing all of that research wouldn't have netted any better result. But I'd be super curious to hear from product people who were involved in any of these companies and understand, how did all three of you roll out disastrous redesigns that did not account for what your users actually wanted? Was that the CEO visionary trying to pull you in new directions and making bad product decisions? That is super fascinating to me because I don't understand. All three of them did the exact same thing.
Yeah, well, if there's any out there listening to us, that would be,
Please, we will have you on. We'll do the Dateline 2020 voice masking if you don't want people to know that you're ratting out your former coworkers.
and they can be the first to receive one of our cricket burgers, right?
Oh,
So,
gross. If I edit all the cricket stuff out, that joke won't make sense.
oh, okay, well,
It's fine. We'll see. So I think the other thing that's interesting here is consumer behavior is clearly changing at this point, right? Like social media coming in, Facebook and Twitter and all of these things. But if consumer behavior is changing, that's fine. But the interesting thing is two of these are outclassed by Reddit and Pinterest, who were just basically doing the same thing as them, but with slight tweaks. Pinterest was more image-based, was more visual. It was appealing to specific types of audiences who were not necessarily as techy as the original consumers of some of these apps. Pinterest is a very widely adopted thing by a whole generation of, there's a difference in gender and class and people using Pinterest in a way that were probably, to varying degrees, not necessarily necessarily the developer early nerd class of delicious users. So StumbleUpon, in order to try to correct the change, made itself look like Pinterest. And so it's an interesting if consumer apps have just a different way of operating, because unlike a B2B solution where I can contractually lock someone in for 2 years, and if I do a really good job in those first 2 years and I deeply integrate myself into how that business does its own work, now I have inertia on my side. I have risk averse companies who don't want to make a change versus consumers are fickle and will go with what makes most sense to them. And so even though StumbleUpon tried to adapt and become more Pinterest like, it was too late. Pinterest was now the new shiny thing. Why would I even consider going back to StumbleUpon? That was the thing that didn't work for me anymore. I'm now over on Pinterest doing my thing. It didn't matter that they tried to mimic it and compete.
So the only one I'm really familiar with is StumbleUpon. And I don't remember, did these platforms all have gamification, reward systems? Because I think that's a big difference too, right? That's a stickiness that is tough to walk away from. And we talked about this before. In X,
Twitter.
it is followers, right? Try walking away from 2,500 followers. It is a drug for people. In Reddit, there's the scoring system, right? There's an incentive to stick around. I don't remember if Digg, StumbleUpon, and Delicious had that same stickiness where it made it hard to walk away, where you've invested something, you've invested time, right? And now you have to walk away from it. Do you remember if it had that?
I don't. I know for a while, I believe Digg had a top users board. And so you got a little bit of notoriety from the fact that you were one of the highest rated people sharing articles and things. But I think that might have been as far as it went. Now, also, the problem is, I'm not saying this authoritatively. There absolutely could have been later versions of all of these apps that tried to introduce that kind of stuff. But no, I don't believe that was part of. And that's a fair point. Exactly. What is the way that you create that stickiness with your consumer app to make that lock in more likely? And you're right, gamification is clearly a successful strategy.
Because Reddit has karma, right? Reddit has karma, and that's tough to
Yep.
walk away from. X, I have to admit, 2,500 followers would be tough to walk away from, depending on the context, right? Like if I have a bunch of crazy people following me because I'm saying crazy things, probably an easier community to walk away from than people who genuinely are like, hey, this is a great community. You have information to share. I don't know if I could walk away from 2,500 followers as easy. So there's a stickiness there. I don't remember that in StumbleUpon at
Yeah.
all. So I wonder how much
Yeah.
of that just affects the movement of users, right? Once they go, there's an incentive not to go back.
One of the other things that I think is interesting in each of these cases is every company needs to make money. And most of these didn't plan for that from the start, right? This was the early 2000s where making money was a secondary goal for your investors, which is bonkers. That was insane in the dot-com, and the reason the dot-com bubble burst in the late 90s, early 2000s is for that reason. And then we came out of that burst bubble. We invaded Iraq, and the world was different for a couple of years, and then Web 2.0 came along, and no one learned a single mistake. Every single one of these companies had no plan to make money. And so as you try to then shoehorn revenue into these existing solutions, I go back to the same question we started to talk about with Twitter, of the way you make money is not necessarily going to be something that the users are expecting because it's a new thing you're adding in rather than being baked in from day one. And so, of course, when Digg adds the API so that publishers can post their own content directly and publishers can start to game the system, and even I think there was some, I believe at some point they found out that Digg was actually prioritizing publishers secretly in the algorithm even further than that. There was some real understandable financial incentive for Digg to get people to come to the site and pay them ad revenue. All of that was counter to the point of Digg. The point of Digg was user generated reviews, and you're giving me the algorithmic sorting based on people of similar mind saying that this is content that I want to see. And so if you don't know how you're going to make money at the start, and then you have to figure that out and you have to change the interaction for your users, and you start to prioritize the revenue over the user experience, of course you're going to lose users as a result of that. Versus anyone who's figured out how to, I mean, I'm not sure, I don't know that I believe Facebook has technically figured that out. They've just done it in such a way that hasn't I won't say it hasn't annoyed users, it's annoyed plenty of users. It's caused plenty of problems, but somehow Facebook has survived that storm. These platforms need to make money in order to exist. You need to pay people so that they can continue working at these companies. You need to pay for the infrastructure and the servers and the cloud and everything that goes into that. But if you haven't figured that out, then maybe don't do it in a way that pisses off your users.
Yeah, and they made the mistakes on the flagship product that they had. So I guess I'll cut them a little bit of slack in that they weren't broad enough, they didn't have enough revenue streams coming in other areas. Fundamentally, I sort of view what they were trying to do as the foundation for the next generation of social networks. Because I've always had a problem with the first generation of social networks, and why I don't use them is that they weren't dynamic. It didn't recognize that I'm not the same human being 24/7 at 10 a.m. on a Saturday. I want my social network to reconstruct itself based on who I am. And the contextual data that these guys had on the types of internet use that I had
Sure.
was the foundation. I don't want to build groups. I don't want to build groups myself. The system should be
You want the
recommending.
system to recognize that
I
and figure it out?
absolutely. The fact we don't have, maybe we do, and I just gave up looking for it. The fact we don't have a decent dynamic social network that shows me different people on a Saturday than it does on a Tuesday is baffling to me. Is one of the reasons I don't use Facebook.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think every once in a while, Google Plus tried to do that. Google Plus had you build circles, I think. No, but they had that idea of
Yeah,
I'm going to put
circles.
Andrew in both the friends and family circle, but also the tech nerd circle, and also the AI apocalypse circle. But you're right; it was up to the user to curate those, and therefore, I mean, I'm sure Google Plus's failure is its own episode at some point. But the fact that you had to be the one to do that versus the system couldn't analyze everything that I was doing, everything that you were doing, and cluster us together accordingly at the right times based on the right topics. That's a level of access to data and compute power that basically Google, Microsoft, and Facebook Meta are the only ones who have access to these days. Maybe Apple, the iPhone.
The true contextual DNA of me online, to me, is there today. With taking into account my cycles and my interests, at some point, my online behavior, obviously privacy concerns come into play and make this much more difficult, but there should never be a question, if privacy concerns weren't an issue, should never be a question of whether it's me. At this point, there should be enough data out there. Granted, it'll be in a variety of different locations and they're not all sharing that data, but there should be no question it's me. My pattern, my changing behavior, whether that's every 3 months I'm into this, the fact that the sports that I watch are seasonal, right? Like let's take Premier League football, for example. There's a finite number of people in a location that would be looking at that. So there's seasonal information, like I'm checking the scores much more frequently, but nobody's going to have a traffic pattern like mine. So I've always been curious as to, and I think of an episode of Black Mirror, right? The social episode where it's my DNA. It's my new credit score, becoming accredited online. So today on LinkedIn, it's the verify now, right? Like I say, I am who I say I am, but I'm fascinated by where it all goes, my online identity. And I actually think it's interesting in today's world with the fake news problem. I wonder if we do start to see controls on the internet where I can control the visibility and say, only show me, and again, it goes back to the dynamic social network, only show me news from accredited journalists, only show me social media members with a credit score above 650. And I sort of see all that data today as the foundation. But think about it, blockchain. In the future, I should be able to, with another high enough accredited user, I should be able to exchange airline tickets. And it should be at the government level become acceptable for that kind of transaction to be done. It's already happening in China, right?
Yeah, with some concerning government control over what is acceptable credit for you to build in ways that are detrimental to at risk communities. But sure, I think the problem you have is human beings suck. And so the definition of who gets to decide what's good credit is part of it's the same problem that the Digg users revolted against. You can't tell us that we can't post the encryption key to HD DVD because we're using your site how we want to. Who is the arbiter of what is good credit?
I think there's levels of trust and in our lifetimes, Kevin, like, are we going to be able to trust any regulation? Look at the Moody and the agencies that rate stocks. Can't really even their ratings were brought into question during the last couple of collapses. Where can we trust any of them?
Sure. See, I think there's an interesting version of this. I don't know why we have to go full dystopia. Like, I think there's an interesting version of what you're talking about, which is if with privacy controls in place so that by the time the cloud system is looking at it, they're just looking at at random user 412 and they don't know enough to do anything malicious with it. But DNA is an interesting comparison because I can cluster similar genes and traits, and you are unique, but you're not that unique actually. You are 90% the same as a bunch of other people who share very similar traits to you. And so you could do a DNA metaphor in which all of the Premier League soccer fans in your part of the country are grouped together by your common patterns, and therefore if one of those people finds an interesting article or something interesting to surface to you, there's interesting aspects of this that I think are applicable. I don't know why we need to go full social credit and have entire new ways of the government persecuting people.
Well, I didn't take it there. I didn't say the government were going to persecute us, but I'd
No,
argue,
that's the natural conclusion of humanity's history.
yeah, maybe the pessimistic view where the government are going to get a hold of it and
Uh-huh.
create the first online caste system. Essentially, I do predict that would
Right.
happen. Yeah, I know that would happen, right? But I'd still argue that even the way I navigate my English Premier League football websites is essentially, when you take all the other contextual data about me, is still unique. The
I'm not
pages
saying
I
it's not
navigate.
unique. I'm saying it's another Venn diagram in
Yes.
which you have overlaps with other people, and machine learning is actually very good at clustering people based on commonality, and so it can identify in the clusters enough of an interesting signal that you are unique, but you are still 80% overlapping with these 400 other people. And so the combination of those 400 people plus you're unique but you overlap with these 200 people, and you're unique but you overlap with these 3,000 people, and that combination of signals means, based on all of that, you're going to be interested in this article about Sports Illustrated shutting down. And you might not have seen that article otherwise, but because of all of those signals that it could understand, now doing this in a privacy secure way is something no company has correctly figured out, but there are interesting opportunities there because it can identify commonality in the uniqueness.
Yeah.
Why is it so important to you to be unique? Why don't you want the commonality? Isn't the commonality where you get the benefit? Isn't that the point of StumbleUpon and Delicious and Digg? Is that they found the commonality, and the models were smart enough to make sure that you got helpful value out of places where you aren't so unique. You want the context switching to be unique to you.
No, those things are all important. I'm actually looking for the holy grail to get around the privacy concerns, which is, if you can truly prove that's my DNA from contextual data, then you've sort of cracked the privacy nut to some extent, in my mind, right? Because nobody's traffic pattern is like me, but you don't need to know anything other than my traffic habits.
But at that point, there's no difference between me opting in to telling you stuff and the fact that I went to my chart and the search term I used on my chart was about the genetic condition I have. You don't get any privacy benefit from that at that point. That's why the idea of people putting their health records on the blockchain is fucking ridiculous.
Well, just to be clear, I'm not I'm not concerned about privacy, right? I'm looking
Okay.
for the workaround.
You think other people are concerned about privacy, and so you need to find ways to mollify them?
Wow. Oh, you make me sound like Lex Luthor.
I mean,
I'm just trying to find what. I'm just saying people. I shouldn't say they're overly concerned about privacy. I just, as somebody who's not concerned about privacy as much as others, I'm just looking for a solution which is a good compromise for everyone. And I think if you can boil my DNA down online in contextual to identify me, you take away a lot of the privacy concerns.
for a straight white man, yeah. That's the problem you have, right? Is you're not concerned because you are straight, white, and a man. Like that's a thing that doesn't impact you in the ways that's why so many people have these concerns, is because historically, when you're not those three things, governments and corporations don't do great things. And so the fact that you could now somehow be trying to be anonymous, trying to do something, if you're a 17-year-old browsing something in Kansas and automatically the privacy controls aren't there and your conservative religious parents find out something about you that was not your choice to disclose to them, that's a privacy concern.
Yeah, and I'm not so relaxed that that would be something that I would ever
I'm
think.
not saying you are.
Yeah,
I'm just saying that's the problem. Is
yeah.
anytime we have these conversations, I immediately understand the extra context of human beings have never once done this successfully.
I just think about these things, and then occasionally I'm like, well, I'm not the only one thinking it, right? There's other brilliant minds out there thinking the same thing.
But I mean, these companies were absolutely affected by consumer behavior is also a thing that is simultaneously shaped by the innovators, but also shaped by other external factors. And so the fact that we all moved to the phone, and so all of our internet consumption became more frequent and smaller. And that's, I would imagine a significant portion of why a lot of these social networks became more successful is because you could do it on a phone. It was small snippets of text on Twitter, it was small little updates on Facebook, it was images on Instagram, it was images on Pinterest. I wonder if the consumption method also had an impact. And these guys, I mean, a bunch of them rolled out mobile apps, but it doesn't sound like they were able to keep up with the way consumer behavior was evolving. And that's a tricky thing in general. I'm not sure I have a, quote unquote product solution to how you need to adapt quickly when the entire environment on which you are based evolves underneath you. You might luck out and figure out how to do it quick enough, and you might luck out and figure out what the thing is everyone should be doing in 2 years and roll it out to them ahead of time and be the place that they want to end up. But that seems like lightning striking. That doesn't seem like there's a product process you could have had in place to account for that. I'm not sure how these three companies actually could have done a couple of things. There's plenty of recommendations I have for them about frickin' talk to your users, figure out how to balance being the next automobile versus not alienating your current user base. There's a bunch of recommendations I have, but I also do wonder that the transition from 2009 to 2016 is an impossible feat.
And that's why I wonder today with machine learning and how accessible it's becoming, and actually, for people like me who are not from that background, not brilliant by any stretch on the math side, and understanding how those models work, is becoming much more accessible. So a lot of those amazing thoughts I had where I was like, I have no idea how to build this, actually it's getting a little bit closer right now. The fact that things like causality detection, role mining, sarcasm detection, anomaly detection, like those things were not things I thought about even 8 years ago. But now, and the more I think about dynamic social networks, the more I think about, yeah, these are all the challenges. How many people could have built that back then? It's only a few years, but it's
Sure.
a lifetime in data science, right? And artificial intelligence.
Right. I also wonder that this is one of those things where just the fundamental mechanics worked against you. So if you think about the way people browsed the internet, it's fundamentally different when you're in a browser and you are interacting with the site that you're reading. And you have, I mean, Internet Explorer was famous for having 17 toolbars stacked on top of one another and just being a terrible experience. But that was the reality of the early to mid 2000s is your browser experience had access to a bunch of these things. You had a delicious toolbar. You had a StumbleUpon toolbar. And so your interaction with your content, as I'm reading this article, I am taking the action of thumbs upping it, sharing it somewhere, versus now when you're on your phone or you're on your tablet or even now you're on your computer, the place that you think to go to is either integrated into the site. There is a tweet this button on the page, and that is the way that you share it. Or I mean, I'm not sure how big Reddit is for most people, but the people who want to share that kind of stuff have the ways of doing that. I don't know. I'd be curious if just the fundamental mechanics changed out from underneath them and they needed to do a better way. But Digg rolled out the Digg bar and the Digg button. I'm challenging my own assumption here, but I don't know. I'd be curious if there's like a mechanical aspect of the way that the fundamental interaction with the web has changed in the last decade also impacted that.
That's interesting though too, right? Because we weren't always a tab culture either in browsers.
Right. No, yeah, it was a completely different experience until Firefox introduced
But
tab.
if you think about, which is a good point, like when I thought about those networks in the beginning, I was always fearful of going after building my own because I was like, I'm going to need an SDK and I got to have a button on the end side and I got to go convince a bunch of, I got to go do that, the stuff that you're probably great at that I hate the idea of sitting with convincing them like this is strategically great for you to stick the greener button on your sites and all your pages, right? And we couldn't imagine it any other way back then. It was like you have to have that button because while people are browsing, they're going to want to do that. It's actually flipped though. With the advent of the tab, I stay in Reddit and people are including links, but I'm just opening tabs. So I'm not actually clicking the button on the remote site anymore that sends it to Reddit. I'm living in Reddit and I'm just sort of navigating out of Reddit to new tabs. For the younger generation, they won't remember before tabs. It was a different experience.
Before tabs, there was a new Windows XP feature in which your taskbar button was basically tabs because you would have 20 Internet Explorer windows open. And so Windows had to show you one Internet Explorer icon in the taskbar. And when you clicked on it, it would show you a little menu that showed you all, 10 of your open browser windows. It was a nightmare to do multitasking, multi-reading, which is why things like Delicious made sense because you found a thing. You had to say, oh, well, I'm currently reading this other article, so I'm going to bookmark that I want to read this later. Like it was a completely different world. It's so bonkers that tabs, such a simple UI metaphor, radically changed the way you interacted with the web.
It did, and it's funny because you bring up the processes. We'd be looking for the process that was eating memory. Which tab is hosing my system right now, and we'd be killing it. And actually, if you look at Chrome these days, I think they actually have the memory consumption for each tab.
They do. Technically, every Chrome exe is a tab, and now they've actually rolled out a new thing in the last year where each tab then gets cached and written to disk, and
Yeah.
it's no longer in memory because it was exactly that problem.
So it's really important for people to understand that is a fundamental change, right? That we, some of us remember what it was like before that, and it did change the way. And it's funny when I think about my internet pattern, jumping between my gaming machine and my phone, I can tell you the time of day, which device I'm on, based on which site I'm using. So throughout the
Sure.
day, I'm generally on my phone and I'm x.com, but I'm very rarely in TikTok. I'm in TikTok at the end of the day when I got nothing else to do and I want to read about aliens moving through portals in a Miami mall. There is nothing serious that I take from TikTok. It's just the Tinder of information for me. I'm just that's interesting. A guy jumping off a building, that's fun. Skateboarders. But yeah, you can tell by the time of day what device I'm on, where I'm going.
Well, and I think that's an interesting point out of that is what, StumbleUpon was for, is it was Wednesday night and you had nothing to do and the internet was the place you went to kill some boredom and you stumbled upon random websites that you either liked or didn't like. The underlying human impulse for exposure to new interesting things hasn't gone away.
But again, is this humans ordering things in a natural sense? Because I stumble upon in very defined categories now. I will have my binge YouTube nights, and I know there are other people that do this, right? They go to YouTube, and I'm stumbling upon interesting things in YouTube. Guitar, like there's a lot more tutorials on YouTube, like in the last 10 to 15 years, right? So I'm stumbling upon videos versus I'm not going to 1,500 sites anymore. I'm going to 15 to 20,
Sure.
and I'm stumbling upon content. But I want my video, I got my music, I got my news and my tech news. But I'm not in 1,500 different places anymore because I think I can get that from the 15 sites that I go to regularly now.
I mean, that's the consolidation of the internet
Yeah.
too, right? Is those algorithms. TikTok starts for everybody as StumbleUpon. TikTok is StumbleUpon at first. It doesn't know what to show you. And so it just shows you random things. And as you swipe past and don't watch, you click like, it learns and it starts. And TikTok gets scary how good it knows what to recommend to you. That algorithm is phenomenal. And if StumbleUpon's algorithm had got that good, I'd be curious if it had survived longer. But that's the other part of it is you might not be you're not stumbling upon alsblog.com anymore, but you are stumbling upon Al's content that he's posting to TikTok. We've created fewer possible places, but those places are still incredibly diverse, and the algorithm is still trying to figure out how to get you the things you seem to like.
But I question, and I'd love to see it. Does TikTok recognize my cycles? It knows my content, but it doesn't know my cycles, right? So it doesn't know.
No, probably not.
It doesn't know when I'm coming into a period of, if you show me that content, you're going to piss me off. I'm not in the mood for that.
You're also probably self-selecting that though, right? You're going to YouTube for the guitar and music stuff. You're going to TikTok for the local weirdness. You might be self-selecting your algorithms in a way that's actually probably good. And I think one of the things that's concerning about the modern tech era is that consolidation and the fact that there are 4 major players doing all of this and all of our information is now being controlled by fewer and fewer people. StumbleUpon was trying to take advantage of the fact that the internet was originally so broad and diverse, and you had the ability to go. There were no walled gardens. You didn't need to go into Facebook or into YouTube or into these places. You went to dansblog.com, and that was the place that had the cool astronomy photos. And that's all he wanted to do on that little blog. And it was the open, wide internet, and StumbleUpon succeeds in that way. I wonder if the other half of this is the 2010s was the consolidation of internet into these walled gardens of
I
single
think so.
places.
Because I mean, it's not like it was news to us, right? As we were setting up this podcast and blog, there were the 6 or 7 places we had to go, right, to bring our
Right.
content. It's not like, it's not like the old days where you set up a website and you're meeting people at Christmas party saying, "Hey, I got a website," and you had to
Right.
your shitty business card with your website on. And people are going to your website. They just assume, well, okay, well, if you've set this up properly, I'm going to find you on YouTube, and I'm going to find you on Facebook, and I'm going to find you in TikTok now. So it's that big consolidation, which is a complete flip on all of these companies, which were like really dependent on me having 1,500 places that was going, and then millions of people
Right.
just like that. So
Yep.
yeah, they didn't morph, they didn't evolve. Maybe they died before they evolved.
And maybe they couldn't have. I'm not sure. Facebook doesn't want Google crawling Facebook posts and being able to do that. They want you coming to Facebook and searching within Facebook. That is the point of these walled gardens, is to make you trapped in their ecosystem and see just their ads and just the things that are done by them. And it's not the open internet. And I think it's hilarious that in the 90s, Silicon Valley hated Bill Gates and Microsoft because Bill Gates and Microsoft had a monopoly through Windows, and that entire industry was obsessed with Linux and Apple because they were not Windows, and they were talking about the greatness of open source and the open internet and all of the things and the amazing future that the internet is going to bring. And then frickin' Steve Jobs rolls out the iPhone and introduces the concept of apps, and it signaled the end of the open internet. Everything now lived, instead of building apps that were open on the internet, we created silos of information and corporate control over these things. The internet is no longer open in the way that it was originally intended, and I don't think a ton of people in Silicon Valley actually care about that because they made a couple $1 billion doing it. But the original pie in the sky idea for all of this has basically died. Oh, the one thing I did want to call out, I thought it was interesting, StumbleUpon co-founder Garrett Camp, who also went on to co-found Uber, which I won't get into my rants about Uber. He was on a government stipend in Canada that helped pay for part of his college. And I think it's interesting, as you talk about, when we had our conversation about AI, as we're going to probably continue to talk about, the intersection of capitalism and technology. I think a lot of people look at the idea of universal basic income and the way to support people and the way that technology can make the future better. I'm not sure most, lift yourself up by your bootstraps, Silicon Valley entrepreneurs did this out of a garage. Those types are necessarily in favor of the level of taxes and government interaction that you would have to have for those kinds of things. And I think it's really interesting that the co-founder of Uber only was able to co-found his first company, StumbleUpon, because the government paid for his college education, and he had enough free time because he wasn't working to earn money to pay for all of that, and he had the free time to start his first startup. And I think it's just an interesting little fact that probably won't get commented on in future discussions, but welcome to the benefits of what happens when people don't have to worry about food and shelter. They can create really innovative, interesting ideas, and we can have the room for people to succeed or fail.
So it sounds like you're spotting, in principle, you're spotting what we talked about in the previous episode about AI and the future. If we didn't have to go to work and do mundane jobs every day, look at what people can achieve when they're given that time and the shelter and the food to be creative. Sounds like you might be supporting my techno-utopian future.
We'll see when this episode drops versus that one coming out, but I was never against the end goal. I'm just deeply concerned about how you get to that goal. All right, well, that's going to do it for us on this episode of Acceptance Criteria. If you liked what you heard, maybe go and drop 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and leave us a nice review. And if you didn't like what you heard, remember, the name of the podcast is Baby Geniuses. Also, tell your friends if you like the show and that they should check it out. Some of the best podcasts out there grow by word of mouth, and we'd much appreciate it. And a friendly reminder that we're always interested in hearing questions directly from you, our listeners, for our segment User Stories. If you've got a scenario you'd like help with, whether it's working with an engineering or product team member, trying to figure out how to solve an agile process problem, or you just can't understand why your favorite app updated everything and it's now terrible, we're here to talk it through with you. You can send those questions to acceptancepod@gmail.com or hop onto the Discord and use the User Stories channel, and we might be able to help on a future episode. And we're happy to keep it anonymous so no one can trace it back to you if you end up talking a coworker or something. To read articles that we've written on similar topics to the one we talk about here, head over to the blog at acceptancepod.com. You can also follow us on most apps. We're at acceptancepod. We'll post links to show notes and any articles from the blog there. We're also building a community on Reddit at r/acceptancecriteria and on Discord. You can find links to both in the show notes on the blog, and I promise we'll be moderating the crap out of them to keep it a nice little slice of the internet. For now, I'm Kevin Thomas Euland, and you can find me on most apps at kthomaseuland. That's ULLAND.
And I'm Andrew Greener, and you can find me on most apps at Criteria Greener. That's GREINER. And this has been Acceptance Criteria. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.